range of public interest factors, which we have discussed in our judgment.
You'll be the first one to put up against the wall!
Film me, mate. Will you film me?
Do you have anything to say?
When British justice chose its side, the Epping verdict that changed everything. Right? Let's cut through the noise and talk about what just happened in Britain. Because whilst the mainstream media are busy spinning the story 6 ways from Sunday, there's a rather inconvenient truth they prefer you didn't notice. Lord Justice Bean has just delivered a ruling that doesn't merely overturn a local council decision. It fundamentally rewrites the social contract between the British state and the British people. And frankly, if you're not paying attention to this, you're about to find yourself living in a country you no longer recognize. Here's what they don't want you to understand about the Epping migrant hotel case. This isn't about planning permission. It's about power. It's about who gets to decide what happens in your community. And more importantly, it's about discovering that the answer to that question isn't what you thought it was. Epping Forest District Council, those democratically elected representatives of actual British people, made a perfectly reasonable decision to close down a migrant hotel. The Home Office, under Yvette Cooper's stewardship, immediately ran crying to the courts. And now Lord Justice Bean has ruled that actually asylum seekers have more rights than the people of Epping. Let that sink in for a moment. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. Because Justice Bean didn't just overturn the council's decision, he issued an injunction specifically designed to prevent protests. Yes, you heard that correctly. A British judge has issued a court order to stop British people from exercising their fundamental right to peaceful protest in their own country, about decisions affecting their own communities. The sheer audacity of it is breathtaking, but what's even more remarkable is that he admitted this injunction might actually increase the risk of civil unrest rather than reduce it. So why do it? Because apparently, the alternative of allowing democracy to function normally is simply unthinkable. Nigel Farage has called this exactly what it is, the European Convention on Human Rights being weaponized against the British people. His Reform UK party has now unveiled what they are calling a national emergency deportation plan that would see Britain withdraw from the ECHR entirely, along with several other international refugee agreements. Now, before the usual suspects start shrieking about human rights, perhaps we might ask, what about the human rights of British people to have their democratic choices respected? The establishment's response has been predictably hysterical. Carol Malone absolutely eviscerated Keir Starmer on GB News, tearing apart what she called a scared approach to this crisis, and frankly, it's about bloody time someone did. Starmer's Labour government promised to end hotel accommodation for asylum seekers, yet here we are watching them fight desperately in the High Court to keep hotels open. The cognitive dissonance would be amusing if it weren't so damaging to the very concept of democratic accountability. Lee Anderson delivered what can only be described as a devastating 11-word judgment on this court victory, and his assessment cuts right to the bone of what's happening here. Robert Jenrick has exploded with fury, and even Kemi Badenoch has ordered all Conservative-led councils to follow Epping's lead. The political class, for once, seems to grasp what's at stake, even if the judiciary apparently doesn't. But let's talk about the real game being played here, because Edward Brown Casey, representing the Home Office, made a rather telling admission in his written arguments. He stated that the original Epping decision showed no regard to the obvious risk that other councils might follow suit. Think about that for a moment. The Home Office's own barrister is admitting they are terrified that democracy might actually start working the way it's supposed to, with local representatives representing local people rather than implementing diktats from Whitehall and Strasbourg. Meanwhile, Piers Rylesmith from Simone Hotels worried about the hardship that would be inflicted on asylum seekers if they had to relocate. What about the hardship inflicted on British communities who never consented to this arrangement? What about the hardship of discovering that your vote doesn't actually matter when it conflicts with preferred outcomes of people who were never elected to anything? The polls are reflecting what any sensible person already knows. The overwhelming majority of British people believe their local councils should have the right to prevent migrant hotels in their communities. But apparently, public opinion is irrelevant when it inconveniences the administrative state. Your views matter right up until they don't, and who decides when they don't? Judges like Lord Justice Bean, implementing laws you never voted for, accountable to institutions you've never heard of. Richard Tice from Reform UK put it perfectly. Judges have systematically chosen the side of illegal migrants over British people, and only reform can be trusted to end this constitutional vandalism. Now, you might not fancy reformed politics, but their analysis of what's happening is spot on. British institutions are openly prioritizing non-British interests over British ones, and they are not even pretending otherwise anymore. This is the new reality Starmer's government represents. Your rights as a British citizen are subordinate to the rights of people who've entered the country illegally. Your democratically elected representatives can be overruled by unelected judges implementing foreign law, and your right to protest can be suspended if it makes the authorities uncomfortable. It's not the Britain most people thought they were voting for, but it's a Britain they are getting whether they like it or not. The Home Office claims the original Epping decision set a dangerous precedent for other councils. Dangerous to whom? Dangerous to a system that spent decades slowly removing power from the British people and transferring it to supranational bodies that operate beyond democratic accountability. Because that's exactly what this precedent threatens, and that's precisely why they are so desperate to overturn it. What makes this particularly galling is the industrial-scale dishonesty involved. If the British state believes this country should house unlimited numbers of asylum seekers indefinitely, they should make that case honestly and seek a democratic mandate for it. Instead, they promise to reduce numbers whilst fighting in court to maintain them, leaving communities to deal with the consequences of policies they never voted for and were never honestly consulted about. The appeal process will grind on, of course. The Home Office will continue spending your money on lawyers to argue that your elected representatives shouldn't represent you. Constitutional experts will explain why democracy must sometimes be suspended to save it. And meanwhile, more hotels will be requisitioned, more communities transformed without consultation, and more British people will discover their citizenship grants them no special consideration in their own country. GB News interrupted their programming for breaking news that spelled more bad news for Starmer, and frankly, it's about time. The polls show him being ripped apart over small boats, torn to shreds over asylum policy, and facing a growing revolt from Labour councils who are beginning to realize they might actually have to implement the policies they campaigned on. The question many are asking is whether Yvette Cooper should resign over this asylum hotel catastrophe, but resignation suggests a level of accountability that simply doesn't exist in modern British governance. Faraz has called for protests across Britain, and councils are lining up to challenge migrant hotels in their areas. The council that closed the Epping Hotel predicts more legal battles ahead, and they're absolutely right. This is just the beginning of a much larger constitutional confrontation about who actually runs this country and in whose interests. Here's what Justice Bean's ruling really represents. It's a moment when the British establishment stopped pretending that your opinion matters. They've chosen their side, and it's not yours. The system won't reform itself. The courts won't save democracy, and the politicians who promise change are often the most committed to preventing it. So what happens next? That depends entirely on whether the British people are prepared to accept that their democracy has been quietly abolished whilst they weren't paying attention, or whether they are going to do something about it. Because make no mistake, this is about much more than one hotel in Essex. This is about whether Britain remains a sovereign democracy or becomes something else entirely. The battle lines are drawn, the sides are being chosen, and the future of British self-governance hangs in the balance. The only question left is which side of history you want to be on when the dust settles. If you want the stories that matter, the ones they'd rather you didn't understand, then subscribe to UK Corners right now. Because whilst others tell you what to think, we give you what you need to think for yourself. Hit subscribe and let's keep holding power accountable together.